Picture this. You're walking through a forest in central Italy. The sun is setting, the air is still, and all around you stand stones older than Rome. You've wandered into what was once an Etruscan necropolis, a city of the dead. You move slowly between the tombs, their entrances carved into the earth like open mouths, still whispering after 2,500 years. And that's when you see it. A faded painting inside a chamber where no living person has stood in centuries. A woman, winged, watching a dying man with eyes that are sorrowful, compassionate, almost protective. In her hand, she holds a torch turned downward, the flame symbolizing the moment life flickers out. Around her breast, crossed straps mark her as a huntress. Her wings, painted in shades of blue and adorned with eyes, seem to see everything, watch everything, know everything about the soul before her. You don't know it yet, but you're staring at Vanth, a goddess once worshipped, feared, and trusted by one of history's most enigmatic civilizations. A goddess who guided souls into the afterlife. A goddess who never judged, never condemned, never demanded worship, but who was always there at the moment between life and death. And then she was erased, not slowly, not naturally, but overwritten, first by Rome, then by Christianity, and finally by time itself. Today, most people don't even know the Etruscans existed. Fewer still have heard the name Vanth. But tonight you will. Before we begin this journey into the ancient world, if you're fascinated by forgotten myths and lost civilizations, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. And if this story moves you, leave a comment. I read every single one. Let's rediscover these lost gods together. Because to understand Vanth, the forgotten angel of death, is to step into a world where the boundary between life and the beyond was gentle, guided, and deeply human. This is the story of a goddess who refused to be cruel and was punished for it. Imagine Italy long before Rome, before the Caesars, before the legions, before Latin even existed as the dominant language of the peninsula. Here lived the Etruscans, a civilization so sophisticated that Greek writers envied their wealth, their engineering, their art, and their religious rituals. They built cities with running water. They constructed elaborate drainage systems using a tunnel method called cuniculus. They traded with Egypt, Greece, and the Aegean, their merchants crossing the Mediterranean in search of copper, tin, and luxury goods. They wrote books, though almost all of them have vanished. They explored the afterlife with an obsession matched only by ancient Egypt. The Etruscans flourished between the 8th and 3rd centuries BCE, reaching their peak around 500 BCE. Their territories stretched from Tuscany through western Umbria and northern Lazio, eventually expanding north into the Po Valley and south into Campania. They weren't a unified empire, but a confederation of independent city-states, places like Tarquinia, Vulci, Carveteri, and Veii, each governed independently but bound together by a common language, religion, and culture. And yet, we know almost nothing about them. Their language survives in inscriptions but remains partially undeciphered. It's not Indo-European like Greek or Latin. It stands alone, an isolated linguistic mystery. Their temples were destroyed or replaced by Roman ones. Their sacred texts, including the Etrusca Disciplina, the corpus of religious knowledge revealed by the prophet Tagius and the seer Vigoya, were burned by Christian emperors in the 1st millennium AD. Their stories, their myths, were not copied, preserved, or translated. The Roman Senate even decreed the destruction of Etruscan religious texts as Christianity rose to power. The Etruscans simply disappeared. But the dead remember. Their tombs, carved underground like miniature homes, complete with benches, painted ceilings, and carved doorways, were painted with scenes of banquets, dances, athletic games, and the moment the soul began its journey beyond death.
These weren't gloomy places. Etruscan tombs were celebrations of life, filled with terracotta sculptures of the deceased reclining at feasts, wine cups in hand, that enigmatic Etruscan smile frozen on their lips, the smile of those who have crossed the threshold and know secrets beyond our reach. And again, one figure appears, a winged woman, watching quietly, present at every transition, sometimes rising from the ground itself as depicted on ash urns from Chusi, sometimes standing alone, a solitary guardian on the sides of sarcophagi. Vanth. To the Etruscans, she was not a monster, nor a tormentor, nor a judge. She was a guide, a psychopomp, someone who walked beside you into the unknown. To understand why she mattered, we need to step into the Etruscan view of death, a worldview so different from Greek and Roman thought that it shocked ancient writers. To the Etruscans, death wasn't punishment. It wasn't a moral reckoning. It wasn't the end. It was a journey, long, sometimes frightening, often confusing, and no one was expected to walk it alone. The Etruscan religion was built on the belief that divine power manifested in all visible phenomena. Unlike the Greeks and Romans, who believed lightning occurred because clouds collided, the Etruscans believed clouds collided in order to release lightning, a subtle but profound difference. To them, the gods weren't distant observers, but active participants in every aspect of existence, including death. That's where Vanth came in. When an Etruscan died, Vanth appeared at the very moment the soul separated from the body, not to drag them away, not to judge them, but to accompany them. She first appears in Etruscan iconography around 400 BCE, during what scholars call the middle period of Etruscan art, though earlier inscriptions mention her name. Over the following centuries, she becomes one of the most commonly depicted figures in Etruscan funerary art, appearing on tomb paintings, sarcophagi, ash urns, and painted vases. Her torch, always held downward, symbolized the extinguishing of life, but also the light needed to navigate the shadows of the underworld. Some scholars interpret it as a status symbol or mark of office, but most agree it served to illuminate the path ahead. Her wings, often blue or patterned with the feathers of a nightbird, represented swiftness and protection. In many depictions, these wings bore painted eyes, a symbol that death sees all, that nothing escapes its gaze. Her clothing marked her as a huntress, high hunting boots, a short pleated skirt, and crossed straps over her bare chest. This attire led some early scholars to suggest Greek influence, perhaps from the Erinyes, the Furies of Vengeance. But this comparison fails. The Erinyes were avenging spirits, creatures of wrath and punishment. Vanth was nothing of the sort. Sometimes she carried scrolls, names written down, destinies recorded. In at least one depiction, the scroll actually bears her own name, Vanth, written in the Etruscan alphabet adapted from Greek. Some scholars believe these scrolls contained the fate of the deceased, interpreting Vanth as a goddess of destiny who recorded what would come. Sometimes she held a key, the key to unlock the doorway to the underworld, the portal between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Sometimes a sword, if the death was violent, symbolizing the finality of mortality. She appears frequently in scenes of slaughter and murder, in depictions drawn from the Trojan cycle, watching as heroes fall in battle. But always, she was calm. Her face showed empathy. Some ancient art even portrays her with tears. Compare this to Greek mythology. Thanatos was feared, a dark figure who brought death with cold inevitability. Charon demanded payment, an oval coin for passage across the river Styx. Hades ruled with indifference, a king of shadows who rarely showed mercy. The Etruscans wanted something different. Their goddess of death was gentle, comforting, and deeply present. In a world full of war, plague, childbirth risks, and famine, Vanth was stability, a universal companion, not feared, but welcomed. Imagine now that you are an Etruscan lying on your deathbed in one of the great cities, perhaps Tarquinia or Volci, around 350 BCE. The room is dim. Family surrounds you. Priests called haruspices, diviners who read the future in animal entrails and lightning, chant ancient words that have long since vanished from human memory. Incense burns. Offerings have been made. Your breathing slows. The world grows quiet. And in that silence, you feel a presence. A warm breeze, though no window is open. A faint rustle of feathers. You open your eyes, not with fear, but with recognition. Vanth stands beside you. She is not luminous like an angel. She is not terrifying like a demon. She is simply there. A companion. A guide. Her expression is soft, almost sad, not because she brings death, but because she understands the weight of leaving. Unlike Charon, her occasional companion, that fearsome figure with blue-gray skin symbolizing decay, pointed ears, snakes wrapped around his arms, and a hammer to guard against evil spirits, Vanth comes with gentleness. Charon might stand at the gates of the underworld, hammer raised, his brutish appearance designed to frighten away malevolent forces that would prey on the vulnerable dead. He might swing that hammer to ensure finality, to protect the soul on its journey. But Vanth? She holds out her hand, and you take it. This was the Etruscan view of death, a passage guided by a goddess who understood human emotion. The tomb paintings show this moment again and again. In the Anaguifa tomb at Tarquinia, Vanth and Charon flank doorways that are sometimes shown half open, giving glimpses of the realm beyond. In these images, the dead are not being dragged or forced. They are being escorted, accompanied, protected. On the sarcophagus of Lars Pulaina at Tarquinia, dated to the 3rd century BCE, 2 Vanths and 2 Charons stand on either side of the nobleman's reclining figure. This repetition suggests that Vanth may have not been a single deity, but a type. Multiple Vanths, multiple guardians, enough for every soul that needed guidance. In the Francois tomb, at Volci, dating to the 4th century BCE, Vanth appears in one of the most vivid scenes of Etruscan art, the sacrifice of Trojan prisoners. While Greek heroes commit acts of violence, Vanth stands observing, her presence marking the moment when life transitions to death, her torch raised, her expression solemn, but not condemning. This vision terrified their neighbors. The Greeks were disturbed by the idea of a compassionate death demon. The Romans considered her too gentle, too humane for their austere worldview that valued severity, judgment, and lawful order. The Roman philosopher Seneca would later articulate the difference between Roman and Etruscan thought. Romans believed things had meaning only as they occurred. Etruscans believed things occurred because the gods willed them meaning. This fundamental difference extended to death itself. And so when Rome conquered Etruria, a gradual process that culminated in devastating campaigns in 83 and 82 BCE under the dictator Sulla, a campaign began, not just of political domination, but spiritual replacement. Vanth was about to be rewritten.
The Romans loved borrowing gods, but they changed them, reshaping them to fit Roman ideology, bending foreign deities to serve Roman purposes. The Etruscan gods were no exception. Tinia,
the Etruscan sky god, became Jupiter. Uni, the queen of the gods, became Juno. Aita, lord of the underworld, was absorbed into Roman conceptions of Hades or Dis Pater. Turan became Venus. The process was systematic, deliberate, and politically motivated. The Romans adopted Etruscan religious practices wholesale. The art of haruspicy, divination from animal entrails, the marking of sacred boundaries called pomerium, the placement of temples on high platforms called podia, even the use of the arch and vault in construction. They took the Etruscan alphabet and made it their own. They borrowed their symbols of authority, the fasces, bundles of rods carried before magistrates. But Vanth, she had no Roman equivalent. Rome didn't want a goddess who treated death with tenderness. They preferred severity, judgment, lawful order, punishment. Their conception of the afterlife became increasingly judicial, a place where the wicked suffered and the righteous were rewarded, where moral accounting determined eternal fate. A psychopomp who guided without judging, who accompanied without condemning, who showed compassion in the moment of death, this had no place in Roman ideology. So Vanth was not absorbed. She was discarded. Roman authors ignored her. While they wrote extensively about Greek and Roman deities, while they preserved countless myths and legends, Vanth went unmentioned in their texts. Roman priests banned her depictions from new temples. Roman generals looted Etruscan tombs, not just for treasure, but to destroy symbols of a conquered people's spiritual independence. When Rome finally crushed the last Etruscan resistance in the 1st century BCE, the process of cultural erasure accelerated. The Etruscan language was abandoned in favor of Latin. Etruscan names were Romanized. Etruscan religious practices, once adopted, were stripped of their context and meaning. The historian Livy would write about Etruscan kings who ruled early Rome, but he wrote as a Roman, filtering everything through Roman values and prejudices. The Etruscan perspective was lost. And when Christianity rose centuries later, it dealt the final blow. A goddess who guided souls gently had no place in a religion shaped around salvation versus condemnation. The early church fathers saw the world in stark binaries, heaven or hell, saved or damned, righteous or wicked. Church leaders labeled Vanth a demon. Her images were smashed. Christian emperors ordered the burning of remaining Etruscan religious texts. Pope Gregory I would later command the destruction of pagan sites throughout Italy. Her name was forgotten. The psychopomp became a ghost. And for nearly 2,000 years, Vanth slipped into silence, buried in tombs that collapsed, in paintings that faded away, in inscriptions that weathered away to nothing. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologists digging in rural Tuscany and Lazio stumbled upon her again. Tombs filled with frescoes, sarcophagi carved with winged figures, ash urns from Volterra decorated with a solitary female form, artifacts labeled with names no historian recognized. And across dozens of these finds was the same woman, always winged, always calm, always present at the threshold of death, sometimes accompanied by Charun with his hammer and his serpents, sometimes alone, a guardian standing watch. At first, scholars thought she was a fury, or a harpy, or some malformed version of Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Then they found inscriptions. One word repeated: Vanth. Suddenly, the mystery of the Etruscan afterlife cracked open. Scholars began to piece together her role. They examined the corpus of 100-plus identified Vanth figures across museums and archaeological sites. They noted patterns, her consistent appearance in death scenes,
her benevolent expression contrasting sharply with more menacing underworld figures, her tools of guidance rather than punishment.
They discovered that she had no direct parallel in Greek or Roman mythology. She was uniquely Etruscan, a product of a culture that approached death differently than its neighbors. Here was a goddess unlike any other in the ancient world. She never punished, never judged, never asked for worship, never gave commands. She simply appeared when needed most. She represented the human face of death. In a world of cruel gods, she was merciful. Modern scholars like Larissa Bonfante and Nancy de Grumand have written extensively about Vanth, attempting to reconstruct her significance from fragmentary evidence. Their work reveals a complex figure whose role evolved over centuries, whose depictions varied by region and time period, but whose essential nature remained constant: a guide, a protector, a companion in humanity's darkest hour. So why was this goddess targeted for erasure? The answer is simple and unsettling. She offered a version of death that was too comforting. Empires, religions, and conquerors have always used death as a tool of control. Obey or suffer in the next life. Believe or be punished eternally. Submit to authority or face damnation. Fear of death, fear of judgment, fear of eternal torment, these are powerful mechanisms for maintaining social order, for compelling obedience, for justifying hierarchy. But Vanth taught the opposite, that death was not judgment, but companionship, not torment, but a journey, not fear, but transition, not punishment, but passage. A worldview like that undermined political authority. If death held no terror, if the afterlife required no priestly intercession, if divine judgment was replaced by divine companionship, what leverage did rulers have? The Etruscans believed in intimate contact with divinity. They consulted the gods before every major decision, but their gods, while powerful, were not tyrannical. Their afterlife, while perilous, filled with monsters like Cerberus, the Gorgons, and the giant Geryon, was navigable with the right guides. Rome needed something different. As they built an empire, they needed a cosmology that supported imperial authority. They needed gods who demanded obedience. They needed an afterlife where moral failings had consequences, where rebellion against earthly authority could be painted as rebellion against divine order. Christianity, emerging centuries later, intensified this trend. Salvation became conditional. Eternity became a reward or punishment. Death became the ultimate judgment. And so Vanth vanished, systematically, intentionally. But she survived in art, in stone, in pigment, in silence, waiting for someone to remember, waiting for someone to see the torch in her hand, still burning downward, still guiding the lost. The irony is profound. In trying to erase a goddess of compassionate death, her destroyers only proved why she was necessary. In a world increasingly defined by fear, judgment, and punishment, Vanth represented something we're still searching for: the possibility that our final moment might be met not with terror, but with kindness. As you walk away from the Etruscan necropolis, you realize something. Vanth was never truly erased. She was simply waiting beneath the earth, forgotten, but not gone. Her story is more than mythology. It's a reminder that even in the darkest moment a person can face, humanity once envisioned compassion. A goddess who cared, a guide who stayed, a presence who refused to abandon the dying. Think about what that means. In 400 BCE, when life was brutal and short, when disease and warfare claimed lives without warning, when childbirth could be a death sentence, the Etruscans created a deity whose sole purpose was to ensure no one died alone. not to judge whether you deserved death, not to tally your sins, not to determine your worthiness, just to be there, to hold your hand, to light the way. And now she is returning, not as a deity, but as a memory reclaimed. As archaeologists continue to excavate Etruscan sites, as scholars decode more inscriptions, as museums display her image to new generations, Vanth emerges from the shadows. We see her in tomb paintings that have survived 2,500 years. We read her name in inscriptions carved in an alphabet few can read. We trace her influence in the very concept of the psychopomp, the guide of souls, that appears in cultures around the world. Perhaps she's more relevant now than ever. In our modern world, we've medicalized death, hidden it away in hospitals, made it clinical and distant. We don't talk about dying. We don't prepare for it. We fear it in ways the Etruscans never did. But Vanth whispers the different message, that death doesn't have to be terrifying, that the final transition might be accompanied, that we might, at the end, be met not with judgment, but with understanding. Because some gods don't die. They're just waiting to be found again. And in the faded frescoes of Tarquinia, in the carved reliefs of Volterra, in the painted vases scattered across museums worldwide, Vanth still stands. Wings spread, torch lowered, eyes watching, waiting for the next soul who needs a guide, waiting for us to remember that death, at least once, was imagined as an act of mercy. If this story resonated with you, give it a like. It helps more people discover these forgotten tales. And tell me in the comments, what other lost gods and goddesses should we resurrect from history's shadows? Your suggestions shape future episodes. Subscribe if you haven't already, because next time we're diving into another deity the world tried to erase. Until then, remember, some stories are too powerful to stay buried forever.